Thanks to everyone who's joined us. We're just giving it a little bit of time for further attendees to join. Our plan is to kick it off at 6:05, but thanks again for joining us. Mick, nice to see you join us.
No, I have played it.
For those attendees who have just joined us, thanks very much. We're just giving it another minute or two for the other registered attendees to join, and then we will kick this off. I just want to check, Sebastian, you can hear us, and Mick?
Yes.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I just
Sebastian?
had trouble finding the link again to join the webinar, but I'm here now.
Yep, that's terrific. It's lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us. We'll just give it a couple of, just 1 or 2 more minutes to get the rest of the attendees to join us. Mick, can you hear us? We haven't had you come through yet. Mick Badham?
Yeah, I think he was struggling with the link, so he's just hung up on the phone. I saw him pop up and then he disappeared again.
He's connected to audio. That's good.
Your settings. Should be the watch camera.
Mick, just checking you can hear us.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Perfect. We can hear you. We can't quite see you, but
I've got the 14-year-old IT expert on it.
cool.
It worked for me, so I don't know why. Start my video. What the fuck? Camera, that's what it should be saying.
Mick, it's perfectly okay to put yourself on mute while working your way through IT.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Don't swear, Mick.
That's not me. That's not...
Yep. All right. Well, I think we might kick this off, and if we haven't got Mick's IT problem solved right at the outset, I'm sure we'll get it sorted before Mick's due to speak. Welcome everybody to this second Zoom seminar on synthetic turf, and it's about, we titled this "Not Always Greener: Synthetic Turf Myths," but I think many of us here already know that it's deeply problematic. Synthetic grass, artificial grass, synthetic turf, however you want to call it, it's not grass. And what we have seen across major cities in Australia, major cities really across the world, but it's been particularly noticeable in Sydney over the last 5 to 6 years, is this increasing number of synthetic turf fields popping up all around our city. There are major concerns, environmental, there are major concerns in terms of access to public open space, and there are major concerns in terms of the loss of nature through the heartland of our cities. That's what this seminar is about, and we have 5 terrific speakers who will take you through from a community activist standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, and also to tell us what the alternatives are, what the natural turf alternatives are. And hopefully at the end of this seminar, you will find yourself armed with the information you need to protect your local park from one of these industrial play areas, to protect your local waterways from the runoff and the particularly toxic runoff that comes from these, and to ensure that our green open space remains A, natural, and B, something we can all share and enjoy. So I would like to really commence by acknowledging I'm on Gadigal land. All of these facilities are being built on First Nations land. And when we're talking about green open space and we're talking about protecting the environment, I think we should acknowledge just the extraordinary custodianship that First Nations peoples have shown on this continent for tens and tens of thousands of years. And we should reflect upon the damage we've done in just 2.5 short centuries since. And we're talking about protecting nature. We're talking about respecting the land that we all share and prize so much. Well, we have a huge amount to learn from First Nations peoples, because they really are the experts, and they really are the people we should be not just learning from, but also handing over custodianship of much of this land, so as they can protect it as well. So with that short introduction, I might just note a couple of other things that have happened since we had our last coming together to talk about this. As a result of the last seminar, at which the New South Wales Open Spaces Minister's office attended, there is now an agency review of synthetic turf fields across Sydney and potentially across New South Wales. We did again invite the minister's team and the agency, the department's team, to come and join us at this seminar. They weren't able to make this seminar, but they did tell us this, that the draft report is almost concluded and will soon be going before the minister for approval, and then hopefully for dissemination to the public in the very near future. And I've got to say, the impetus that I think coming together gave to the campaign against synthetic grass was, I think, critical in getting that report being done and getting, hopefully, we hope, common sense, nature-driven, environmentally focused review of synthetic grass fields. But also since that time, the connections that have been made through the experts, through the community activists, I think has really taken the whole campaign up another notch. And there's been a lot of learning in that short period since, and there's a lot more that we can tell you through the course of this seminar. So that's enough of an introduction from me, David Shoebridge, one of the Greens MPs in the State Parliament in New South Wales. And the first speaker I want to throw to is Sebastian. Sebastian comes to us with a wealth of experience. He's kind of the brains trust that's been testing really some of the impacts of these synthetic grass fields. And in fact, the work of Sebastian, I think, has been critical in informing all of us in the responses that we're taking to this surge in synthetic grass fields. So I will throw it over to you now, Sebastian.
Thank you, David. And where am I, everyone? I'm coming from Darug land tonight, and also want to acknowledge the First Nations people, in particular the Darug, Eora, Darawal and Wiradjuri, who are the traditional custodians of the land where I live and work. Through my work, I hope I make a difference. And it's every day. If it's locked down or it's not locked down, it's every day that we're working on this. The Western Sydney University has now embraced the same strategy that Australia Post has just released. So now we are encouraged to, even in our signature, always mention on which land we are working and living. I'll share my screen. There seems to be always a little hiccup to share the presenter view or the full screen. So let's just get this going. What are you seeing? The presenter screen, I assume. Yeah, you're muted.
The presenter screen, not the final screen.
Yeah. All right, let's leave this and I'll pop this presentation on another screen. That's the trouble working with two screens.
Indeed.
Yep, and I'll just pull the plug on this one. That should do the trick. Zoom, share, share this, and share that.
That is working
we're
beautifully.
here.
That's it.
All right, I've got 15 minutes. Hopefully I don't need that long. As David pointed out, I'm working as a researcher on synthetic turf. I came from it, not from a sports field perspective, but from schools and playgrounds. You can find these reports. I published them. They're publicly available. They have lots of information in them. Below there, if you want to screenshot that, you see the DOIs that take you straight to the PDF that you can download from our research repository. You can also see that, for example, the school microclimates report that I published last year was published together with the New South Wales government. This is a resource that is now available not only through our webpage or through Macquarie's, but also through Adapt New South Wales. So these resources are not just my own work, but they have been adopted also by state government and local government. For example, the Climate Smart Playground that also looks at AstroTurf is published together with the Cumberland Council or Cumberland City Council. So these resources are available for you out there. If you want to go to these web pages, use the DOI and have a look at all the other work as well that we've been doing over the last 3 years, really, in that space, looking at surface temperatures in public places, including car parks, hospitals, streets, and playgrounds. Let's get straight to it. AstroTurf is the hottest surface that I find in schools and early learning centers. A few examples. It's a private school in Western Sydney on the left-hand side. In the top, you see the normal view. In the bottom, you see the infrared shots that represent surface temperature by color. The temperature gradient is indicated on the left-hand side, or sorry, on the right-hand side of each image. And those two images really bring home what the problem in those spaces is. They are a burn hazard. Everything above about 60, 65 degrees can become a burn hazard for skin. And of course, when you get to 88 degrees, the skin, the time that it would need to get skin burns is tremendously reduced. So it's absolutely unuseful, this area as in the early learning center at the time when I was there to collect this data. Also, I wanted to highlight how important shade is, and that goes through all of my work. Once you start shading synthetic grass, the problem is basically eliminated when it comes to surface heat. Of course, other problems remain, but surface heat can absolutely be reduced. Sometimes, as you can see here, there are other examples in a moment, by more than 40 to 50 degrees, because we're seeing such extreme temperatures on these surfaces. This is a playground in part of Western Sydney where I've been during the 4th of January last year when we had our ever hottest recorded day. And you can see that this AstroTurf surface, it's a relatively old surface. Also, not only just wear and tear, but worn down with very fine silica sand. Surface temperature at 90 degrees. And importantly, when I was there, I measure what is called feels like temperature through black globe thermometers. This is the instrument exactly when I took that infrared shot, and it shows you that the feels like temperature at that point in time was 63.5 degrees Celsius. So you can feel sorry for me because I'm stupid enough to be out there when we do this research. Of course, there was nobody on the playground. There was nobody in the street. It was 43 or 44 degrees air temperature. It was really hot. But the environment that I'm in accelerates that heat, and particularly the emitted heat from the astroturf surface increases the feels-like temperature on this particular surface type enormously. I find way above 40, sometimes into the lower 50s as a feels-like temperature on astroturf when air temperature is a pleasant 35 degrees under clear skies. So it really is one of the materials that not only has a very, very high surface temperature, but also through its radiation of heat contributes a lot to, in the end, increased risk of heat stress, dehydration, and so on. Just some examples of actual turf on the left-hand side, live turf against astroturf, twice the surface temperature right next to each other. This is a little cricket practicing pitch in Western Sydney, where you have a parkland around that pitch. You may know these lines of fenced areas where you can just practice your throwing. Twice. The air temperature at that time was just in the upper 20s, and you already get 60 degrees surface temperature. And again, a highlight here on cooling. This is about 53 degrees cooling just because of shade. If you introduce proper shade, the problem is basically ameliorated. Very, very important to keep that in mind, because there are places, in my understanding, where synthetic grass has its role and has its a very good place. Take, for example, the roofed area of an early learning center where you are on the first or second story of a podium. You want to have an outdoor area that is not just concrete, and AstroTurf can help there, but then of course you will not have a large area of direct sunshine or a lot of runoff coming from that area. So there are places for this material, but out in the open, particularly in playgrounds, and I guess you could just string the line of evidence to larger playing fields, then this is obviously a very, very large problem. Also, wear and tear and age of the material, but also staple length seems to make quite a large difference. We see here two different materials where surface temperatures are significantly hotter on the material with a shorter staple length. This is not so much the staple length here because it's really worn down, but it appears to be just heating up much more than where we actually see some little blades left. So also when you think over time what happens to your synthetic surface, there are issues that may change over time related to surface heat. Because I'm a scientist, I need to investigate this scientifically and systematically. So we set out to test a large range of common and not so common surfacing materials for playgrounds in particular, because also another material that I found is very problematic is, of course, softfall, which is now used in many, many, many playgrounds. And because the darker colors seem to be more UV stable and therefore need less maintenance or replacement, they are used more. And of course, related to temperature, that is not very smart. We set out with, I think in total, we had about 38 different surface samples and looked at them over the course of a day to really understand how they heat up, what peak temperature looks like, and how they cool down again, to understand what that really means for the thermal environment of the playground using materials like these. We used the outdoor facility at the Solar Institute in Richmond. It was a clear day, 35 degrees air temperature during midday, 1,000 watts per square meter, so full sunshine, blue sky. This particular facility has only glass walls, but no roof. So you are excluding wind, which is good because wind, of course, is cooling. We wanted to have most of the environmental factors excluded to then look at the actual material performance. So we did that. here I'll show you some results. Of course, we concentrate on synthetic grass. This is panel C at the bottom left, where we have 3 different types of synthetic grass and also natural turf. Kyuku, we used Kyuku as a rollout lawn that is used widely. These are the results. So when you look at them, again, please look at the panel on the bottom left, C, which are our astroturfs or synthetic grasses, and also the Kyuku grass, the natural grass. Of all the materials that we tested, the synthetic turf was the hottest material. It peaked at 91 degrees, particularly long and medium pile height or pile length in the samples that we tested reached those very high temperatures. When we had a short pile, it was about, 8 degrees cooler at peak temperature. But what all of these materials displayed, and that also was the case for very dark softfall materials, was that they heat up very, very quickly. They peak for a long time. Once the sun is gone, they also cool down quickly. That's something that's matching my observations in the field, where, for example, you find the lowest nighttime temperatures on sports fields or larger park areas because there is no shade structure that holds warm air in. It dissipates very quickly out into the atmosphere. You can see when you have a material like the real turf, at the end of the day, that can, because of its higher thermal mass, stay a little bit warmer. But of course, against all materials that are man-made or artificial, so all your SBR, EPDM, TPO plastics, and then the synthetic grass, of course, astroturf has the highest temperatures and real turf remains the coolest. So we show here that it's nearly 50 degrees cooler as a surface temperature when you compare that to the synthetic grass. Summing up, synthetic grass or synthetic turf is, of course, the hottest material, and it's continuous, the hottest material in the research that I'm doing in the areas that I described, but that is not coming at a real surprise. When you look at the industry web pages, they are admitting that surface temperature is a problem, and there are more and more products out there where the industry, of course, tries to circumvent the problem. The pile height and age seems to make a difference. So if someone chooses the synthetic grass version, then it's absolutely worth to check which of these products will be hotter or cooler, depending on just the material characteristics. And there is a correlation that you find high surface temperatures during warmer summer days. So as days warm up, as radiation becomes more intense, also the heat problem is increasing, and you find higher and higher surface temperatures. I have to say, because I see these products now arising on the market, I have no data because I haven't seen the products out there in the field performing what they're supposed to perform. Some of them are called hydrochill. There's also hybrid turf that we see advertised as cooler options, up to 30% or 33% even lower surface temperatures, but I have no independent data from these surfaces, so I can't really say anything about how these materials would perform. With that, I leave it, and of course, I'm happy to take some questions later on. I'll stop sharing my screen, and thank you for your attention.
Sebastian, thank you so much for that, as disturbing as it was. 95 degrees, 91 degrees. That's the kind of temperature that is catastrophically high. And the thought that we'd be putting it on an area where we're meant to be doing recreation or having kids run around, extraordinarily troubling. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so I'd urge people to put their questions as they come to your mind in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. before the end. And so again, thanks for the work, Sebastian. Thanks also for getting out there in those death-defying moments and actually measuring those temperatures. We really appreciate it. Our next speaker is Dr. Mick Badham. Mick's spoken with us before and is a certified soil scientist and is from Ag Enviro Solutions. I've got to say that Mick comes with this wealth of experience as a soil scientist, having worked on more than 2,000 parks, racetracks, and sports fields over the course of his career. He knows a little bit about soil science. He knows a little bit about how to keep the turf healthy and what it takes to ensure that natural grass can outcompete synthetic grass. That work has included on projects such as Redfern Oval, Belmore Oval, also out at Barangaroo, Hyde Park, and Randwick Racecourse. He has recently released 4 videos of best practice on turf fields. I'm told that his turf and his soil advice is much more dependable than his batting, but I'm also told that he's a bit of a rock climber in his spare time. So Mick, you've got to stay safe. You've got to not drop off any ledges because we need your expert advice. Thanks.
Okay, how do I share my screen? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Down
How
the
do I
bottom.
share my screen, mate?
Down the bottom, there's share screen.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
That's all working well. Thanks, Mick.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so I was going to talk to you about some of the myths associated with natural turf, and I'll be talking about 2 of the myths, and Paul will be talking about the 3rd myth. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a soil scientist, which no doubt probably conjures up ideas of people that look like this, but that's more of a soil chemist. I'm more of a soil physicist. So essentially I'm measuring how fast the water is going into the soil and then tracing where the water goes. We use a lot of probes, such as this high-tech equipment here and some of these things here. And but obviously we're using a lot of scientific instruments as well, chasing where the water goes and predicting where it goes and how much the soil holds water. Everybody will know that soil can play a major role in what goes on and whether a plant lives or dies. And just at this small scale here, we've got some Nandinas, which many of you recognize from because they're indigenous to McDonald's drive-throughs. And you can see how this tough little plant's being killed by some bad soil just over here. And so the myths that we're going to deal with, there's three myths. There's quite a few of them, but I'm going to deal with the fact that turf can't handle high levels of wear, which is not true, and that it can't drain fast, which is also not true. Dr. Paul Lamble will be speaking later about how the myth of turf can't survive droughts, and he was involved in writing the water restrictions for the lower Hunter for Hunter water. Now, when we talk about what fields can and can't handle, we need to distinguish between fields that have been built correctly, like this one here. And this photo I've taken at the end of the winter sports season, so you can see it's been worn pretty heavily. And this field here, before we reconstructed, it looked like this at the end of the winter sports season. So major difference, exactly the same wear levels, of course. And so the difference here is soil amendment. This has got nothing other than soil amendment as the difference. So you can see it's quite dramatic. And if there's anybody out there who's a greenkeeper, we're not talking about soil amendment as in just throwing a bit of fertilizer on the surface. The soils in Australia are much older than a lot of the soils around the world. And so as a result, they tend to set a lot harder and be a lot lower in nutrients. And what they're crying out for is organic matter. And whereas the soils around the world have got a lot more in them. This soil that I'm holding here in my hand looks like a brick, doesn't it? It's actually extremely sandy soil. It's just got a tiny bit of fines in it, enough to set it like a brick. And as you can see, it's on a sporting field in that one's over towards Cheltenham sort of way. Now, we're very fortunate in New South Wales to have a sustainable source of organic matter that we can add to men's sporting fields. And that's in the form of Australian standard composted garden organics. And the best part about this is you think about what goes in your green bin. It's a lot of lawn clippings and a lot of garden clippings and that kind of stuff. So when you compost it and break it down, it's going to have a chemistry somewhat similar to what the turf will need, because you're essentially putting old turf that's been revitalized back on it. So essentially completing the loop. Now, normally we would mix this in with the soil, but here we've spread it on the surface just for a small trial. And I think this is about 5 days later. And you can see what a dramatic difference the spreading the amender has on the soil surface. Now, imagine you walked across the field before we put the amender there. Just picture that field on the right-hand side there. Would you have noticed that there was anything wrong with the turf? It's got a couple of bits of clover and that kind of stuff. But would you have noticed that there was anything wrong? It still had a successful growing surface, didn't it? But the fact is, it was like driving a car with a handbrake on. That's how slow it was growing. Which brings me to the first myth. Turf can't handle high levels of wear. Well, it can't if you keep the handbrake on it all the time, can it? If you amend the soil and get the turf to grow fast and use suitable turf cultivars and a few other things in the suite of things that we can use to get the field growing and handling high levels of wear. And I've taken this photo about a month after the end of the winter sports season. It obviously copped an absolute pounding with 43 hours a week of football. And you can see it's recovering. It's starting to green up already. Virtually full turf covering everywhere, except a tiny bit still thin where the goalkeeper stands. No turf patching whatsoever. So it's easily made it through. However, before we amended the field, this is what it looked like at the end of the winter sports season. So massive, massive difference here. In the previous webinar, I presented Middlehead Oval. We had 38 hours per week of wear I presented in that webinar. The following day, I spoke to the parks manager about how much wear the field was receiving. And he pointed out to me that the year I'd taken this photo, I'd actually got the usage levels wrong. It had actually received 49 hours a week of wear. That was just the football wear that particular year. But it's changed even more now. If you go online, you can see some of the videos that we've got there. But in that video, basically, it's the soccer club says that their men's Premier League like the field so much that they moved all their home games across to this particular field. And so I took this photo earlier in the week, and this field's getting 55 hours per week of football. And you can see this is the worst part of the field. I've picked the goal box here. And you can see it's going to make it through the winter sports season. It's starting to look a bit tired in this particular spot. Let me go around to the other end of the field, and you can see that it's easily going to make it through the winter sports season. Now, it also gets another 10.5 hours of fitness classes of up to 20 people from the nearby naval base, but I haven't really counted that in those hours, okay? Now, if you look on the left-hand side in this picture, you'll notice the amenity buildings over there, and you notice the turf is very worn on the left-hand side of the building. Look on the left-hand side of the picture. Look at the right-hand side. Look how green the grass is over there. Let me take you over there. This photo I also took earlier this week, and look how green the grass is. So if the soccer club came and trained and the AFL club came and trained on this side of the field, they probably wouldn't wear out the other side of the field. Or let me say it the other way. Let's say they kept up their same practices. There's additional capacity on this site here. Look at, they hardly touched this side of the field. The grass is greener, but apparently it's not. So quite clearly, if you build things right, you can handle very high levels of wear, 55 hours a week at Middlehead Oval. And as I said in the previous webinar, if you book all the weeknights up and you book the weekends up, you'll only get about 43 hours if you fully book what the clubs want anyway. So we're well in capacity of what the turf require, of what the clubs require. The next myth I want to deal with is that turf can't drain fast. Well, if you go back in time, you remember the pictures of what they used to play on years ago, but they don't build sporting fields, or certainly not the elite ones like this anymore. Of course, some of the community-based sporting fields still have that technology there, though, don't they? They've still got that rubbish soil and that there. They haven't amended them in years. If you look at a sporting field built today at elite level, you can see during the heavy rain, you notice on the ground there's no puddles. It's just soaking away. You can get natural turf to drain really, really fast. Now, you might be thinking, okay, they build those fields out of sand, to which I would respond, every single one of these fields was not built out of sand, and they all drain within an acceptable time frame. Many of them drain, you'll have, I don't know, 30, 40 mils of rain, and they're playable virtually straight away, or at least within an hour or two. It's only the very extended rain that occasionally gives some of them trouble, but none of them have drainage systems, and they're already doing fairly well. Over the time, I've surveyed about 2,000 fields, and roughly about 50% of fields just drain well naturally. And the other 50% you have to do something with. Now, why do fields generally drain pretty well? And the answer is, if you look at the data for how many days of rainfall, how many days a year we have more than an inch of rain in Sydney, you'll notice that on average, it's only about 11. So when we can't handle an inch of rain in a 24-hour period, there's something seriously wrong with the soil for us to be impeding it that much. So it's not that hard to get the drainage right on these local fields, provided they're fairly clever about the way they do it. Just for perspective, did you know that in Sydney, there's about 25 days per year hotter than 30 degrees Celsius, and it's almost 70 days a year on average out Penrith where it's hotter than 30 degrees Celsius. Now, this is a very relevant number, because in the synthetic fields guideline, it actually says that synthetic fields shouldn't be played on once it gets over 30 degrees. Now, I'm a cricket player, and 70 days out of, say, the 180 days when the cricket season on, that's 40% of the cricket season. Or if you're like, I can't go to church 40% of the time. This is terrible. And but back onto the drainage, not always do you need to put in expensive drainage systems. You can see that this site here, it's got all these waterlogging problems simply because all the water is running off the netball courts next door. All they needed was a gutter along the side of the netball courts, or possibly even a mound or something to remove the water. Instead, it's just running straight onto the field. Now, every site needs different drainage problems, different drainage solutions to overcome the problems. But typically, somewhere between $20,000 and $80,000 per field will solve those 50% of fields where they have drainage problems. So we're not talking large sums of money. And once they put the gutter in on this particular site, that's it. It's pretty much solved. Now, there are other solutions where they can increase the drainage. These are called slit drains. And essentially, if you go down beneath the sand that they've put in here, there's ag pipes underneath the ground. And so essentially the water runs across the surface and runs down these slits. You don't notice them over time. The grass grows over the top of them, and you can hardly see they're there except in dry weather. Now, here is a field here where they put in the slits, not quite as obvious as the above example. And this field here, they put the slits in too far apart. And not only did they put them in too far apart, the drainage contractor used the wrong size main line to save a few bucks. And despite that, we had 320 mils of rain over 5 days. And here we are 24 hours later, and they're able to drive a cricket roller onto the field to go and roll the wicket. So this is just a local sporting field. This is not built out of sand. This is just normal site soil that we've amended. And you can see that it's not too hard to get soils to drain rapidly and get acceptable turf surface. The final myth that Paul will be dealing with is about how turf can't survive droughts. And I just want to leave you with a few thoughts about that. Did you know, for example, that more than 1,000 fields in the Greater Sydney area don't even have a pop-up watering system? So how are they surviving? They don't die en masse during the droughts. They're surviving, aren't they? Including some of the sites that are the most intensely used fields in Sydney, like this one here down the bottom. It would only cost $200,000 to install an irrigation system at that particular site there, and it's not happened. And yet that council has spent more than $10 million on synthetic turf. This is crazy. And that's it.
Thanks very much, Mick. It's a beautiful ending shot. I suffered through 6 years of agriculture at high school, and I remember my ag teacher, Mick Mathers, saying to me, soils are a living thing. They're a living thing. And it struck me ever since. You know, they're very complex little part of our ecosystem, and the level of knowledge you bring to it is actually really, really important. And in fact, some of those alternate costings, I think, is something we'll drill down to into the questions in the questions at the end of the session. And I'd urge people, if they have questions, to pop them in the Q&A and we will get to them. Our next speaker is Paul Lamble. Paul is from Peak Water Consulting, and he's really focused on addressing water efficiency, drought resilience, and also ensuring that sporting fields and green open spaces actually deliver the amenity we need for community use. He has qualifications in science, commerce, and irrigation design. He grew up on a dairy farm in the Murray-Darling Basin, so maybe we could send him back there to sort out some of those problems as well. So he knows how to water grass. He knows how important grass is, but he now specialises, instead of growing grass for cows, he grows grass for people and for community use. During the last drought, he provided technical advice to Hunter Water on water restrictions, conditions, and exemptions for green open spaces. We're lucky to have Paul. He knows what he's talking about, comes with a wealth of experience. Over to you, Paul.
Unmute. Thanks, David. I'll see how we go here. Let's see if this behaves itself. Share that one. Okay, can you see it?
It's coming, but only as that small.
Yep, okay, well, let's go. All right, how's that?
Still on up, now it's working. Beautiful.
Okay, all right. So I'll talk a bit about water requirements for natural turf and drought resilience from the last drought. This is the same ground that Mick had a photo of before during the drought, under water restrictions, so we'll come back to it. So just some context setting. The summer before last, we had 5 mils of rain over 73 days, so she was pretty dry. It was pretty hot too. Evapotranspiration, which is the amount of water that plants lose, was running at about 6.5, 7 mils a day, and we're under level 1 water restrictions. So that basically meant that sports fields were limited to irrigating twice a week if they had a pop-up irrigation system, and very limited irrigation if they didn't. Okay, first up, this is an unirrigated site photo that Mick took during the drought, and you can see on the right-hand side, the turf's pretty much done and dusted, it's cooked, but on the left, it's still hanging in there. It's not happy, but it hasn't died. And the difference, as Mick has so often pointed out, is entirely due to the soil. So really sandy soils don't have much drought resilience. They don't have resilience when the water's not there. It's a bit like the sugar hit. You have the sugar, bang, take it, gone. Whereas with the site soils, what tends to happen is the water's released slowly. So the plant gets a little bit, hangs on, gets more stress because it has to grab a little bit more water, but it still gets something to cool down. Whereas with the sandy soils, there's no water left for it to cool. So it literally cooks. Here's another unirrigated site. Now, it's not during the drought. I'll be upfront with you. It's 6 weeks after we had the breaking rain for the drought. You can see it's just bounced back. It's absolutely pumping. And it's the compost amended site soil. This site had no irrigation because it didn't have a pop-up system. So the drought, even with no irrigation, hot weather, no rain, didn't kill the turf. We're back in business. The irrigation twice a week. We're looking at two sites that are 10 kilometres apart, literally as the crow flies. They're both getting the same amount of irrigation. In fact, the site on the left or site on the right has actually got a slightly less efficient irrigation system because we had to work with what the contractor put in, and we fixed it up a bit, but it's not as good as the one on the left, which had a well-designed irrigation system. Same type of turf, same levels of wear, it's AFL, roughly same size fields. So the only thing that's different between these two sites is the soil. On the left, we've got an imported sand blend with absolutely no amendment to it, and it's not happy about it. Site on the right is our sandy loam site soil that's been amended with compost. You can see the big difference when they're getting about the same amount of irrigation under level 1 restrictions. Site on the left, it's going to struggle when we have to turn the tap down to level 2 or even level 3 with no water. Whereas the site on the right, we can actually dial that down further. We could probably dial it under level 2 and it'll still be happy, and under level 3 it'll hang on. So during the drought, we did some work on the imported water requirements. Mick did a fair bit of the modelling for this. And with the unamended site soil, we need to bring in about 3.7 megs a year to keep that site going. When we've got no potable water, we've got to bring in an alternative water supply to keep that turf alive. When we amend the site soil, that requirement drops down to about 1.3 megs. So we're actually using a lot less water to keep that turf going. And it will be in better condition, as you've seen in the photos. So yes, turf needs some water, but it doesn't need a huge amount, and it can survive the droughts, as we've seen. We've done this another way too. We've looked at carrying capacity versus different levels of water restrictions. So with the unamended site soil, you can see with the orange line, we start with about 450 to 500 players, but as soon as we dial the water back, the carrying capacity falls, such that we more than halve it by the time we turn the irrigation off. When you got to level 1 and you saw what the field was looking like, it wasn't particularly happy. But when we used an amended site soil, not only did we start with greater carrying capacity, but we were able to hold it all the way through level 1 and level 2 with only a slight reduction when we have to turn the tap off completely. And this is demonstrated also with the photos. You see it was still happy under level 1 water restrictions. The turf, yes, it wasn't going flat out, but it was still happy. It looked good. It could handle more. Now let's have a quick look at water saving measures and how synthetic turf could possibly fit in that. And first, some context. Potable water in Sydney is about $2.38 a kilolitre. Hunter Waters area, it's $2.46. Now we can do some irrigation efficiency work, and it could cost us anywhere between $1 and $10 a kilolitre, depending on what we have to do to save for water. When fixing the soil or turf can be anywhere from 4 to 20. Again, it depends on the site and what we have to do. And why is it so hard to get stormwater and rainwater harvesting projects up? They typically are around $10 to $20 per kilolitre levelised cost, which means we've considered all the water savings, all the costs over the life of the project, and then gone, how many dollars per kilolitre is it costing us? So you can see why it's hard to get them up. So irrigation efficiency, here's one, looks like the aliens have landed. Now, fortunately, they have actually replaced this irrigation system. So that's a good start. But simple things, sprinklers are too low. We see a lot of them, sprinklers leaking. And the piece de resistance, the car wash. Simple adjustments to sprinkler arcs to save water. There are some of these things that are out there, they're routine, that we can save water very effectively and very efficiently and deliver the amenity outcomes. So how does synthetic turf stack up? If we replace our best practice turf field with a synthetic field, we'll save about 1.9 megs a year, but it's going to cost us $160 a kilolitre to do it. So not real flash. I think we can do better. Let's think outside the box a bit. Maybe with our best practice field, we could buy a water tanker and pay someone for 5 months of the year to tanker that recycled water from the treatment plant to our best practice turf field. You'd never do it in reality, except in a severe drought. But if you did, for argument's sake, you'll save you 1.9 megs, only cost you $100 a kilolitre or thereabouts. So we're in front compared to Syntho. Or maybe, to be nice, we just won't go to best practice turf fields. We'll replace that turf field with a synthetic field, okay? Because it's poorer turf, poorer soil, poorer irrigation system, we can save more water, about 4.5 megs a year, still going to cost us $80 a kilolitre. So from a water saving point of view, converting the field to synthetic doesn't stack up when we've got so many better options out there. So again, this is our same field that we started with, that Mick also pointed to with the cricket roller. 320 mils of rain, 5 days. The guys are out there rowing the wicket. It survived the drought. It flourished in the drought, and it's back doing its thing. So again, myth busted, and the contact details are there. I'm all done.
Thanks very much, Paul. It must frustrate you no end as you walk around. I sometimes think about you and Nick in particular, as you walk around looking at the fields across Sydney and New South Wales. It must be very distracting, looking and seeing how much could be done to improve them. And that might explain your batting performance too, Nick. You're too distracted by the grass and the lawn.
He gets to walk around and might have to dig holes.
Again, that if you have questions in the Q&A and you know, going through some of those numbers and water savings with Paul, I think will be useful in Q&A. Put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Our next speaker is actually one of the people who really brought me on in order to get onto this issue using my state parliamentary position and help bring together not only the first forum but also this forum. It's Greta Werner, who is who's one of the lead campaigners to save her local park, Gardner Park, from one of these industrial turf developments. And I've seen Greta pull together a community, educate the community, learn from the community, build a strong campaign locally, and then start making those connections around the rest of Sydney, and indeed now building connections around the rest of Australia in her spare time. Greta's also running for us as a Greens candidate for Bayside Council, and I can tell you, if we got her on council, it would be a bloody good thing. Greta.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so I am actually going to share my screen as well. I'll see if you guys can see that. Is that being shared?
Yeah, that's coming through.
Okay. So yeah, I've already shared this in the chat, but these are some links to some awful stories that we found about the heat impacts of synthetic. But actually, first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on Bidjigal country. And as you might know, if you saw our last webinar, Friends of Gardner Park have been particularly concerned about synthetic fields since June 2020, when we found out that Bayside Council were planning to convert our local park to synthetic without any community consultation, by the way. And since then, we found numerous studies, government reports showing information that makes us really concerned about these fields. And not least the environmental impact of microplastics and all the rolls and rolls of synthetic grass that go to landfill after they're used because they can't be recycled yet. It's particularly upsetting given what we know now from Dr. Badham and Dr. Lamble about how durable natural turf actually is if it is installed and maintained correctly. And we have contacted many experts in the field of environment, heritage, landscape design, and so on. And I just want to say how grateful we are for the time and knowledge that experts are giving us. And I'd like to thank Mick, Paul, and Sebastian again for their time and for sharing their knowledge with us. Now, just a quick update on what we've been up to with Friends of Gardner Park. We've recently discovered that there are some extra product safety concerns with synthetic fields. And one of the things we discovered was that there's actually no Australian standards for the installation of synthetic turf. Now, one of our members, Garnet Brownbill, who has been extremely active, and I want to say a big thank you to Garnet as well, has contacted Standards Australia and was advised that there are no Australian standards related to turf at all, except for AS 5181 2017, which is about the use and installation of turf as an erosion, nutrient and sediment control measure. But this standard actually relates to natural turf and not synthetic. So this is really worrying. Obviously, as we've been told by Sebastian with relation to the heat impacts of synthetic, because the fields are being installed in public parks where people are used to running around barefoot, and it just feels like an accident waiting to happen. So now, since December last year, there are also we've also found out that the European Chemical Agency has recommended a complete ban of infill material for synthetic soccer fields. Now, many of the councils that are installing fields are using the cheapest grade 3 synthetic fields containing 100% toxic rubber granules. And in most European countries, these granules have been faded out so that they're not being used as much now. Within the crumb rubber, there are about 92 chemicals, and in the US, half the chemicals have not been tested yet by government, and those that have been tested contain chemicals that can irritate skin, eyes, and lungs. And as the fields get used, the crumb rubber breaks down and releases toxic chemical dust cocktail that we can inhale into our lungs, and that's certainly not a good thing. Now, we have been looking at what is being installed in our local area, and we've noticed that the infill that's being used at McCarthy Reserve is called Gennon Fine Mix. Now, we've checked the product safety data sheet, and I'll see if I can get my screen to work. Yeah, so there's a link there. I'll post it in the chat later. So this is some of the things that are in the product safety data sheet. So it may, so the rubber dust may result in explosive mixtures, apparently. And then in section 7.1, it recommends showering at the end of shifts. Ensure you wash your workwear daily, wash hands after contact, remove contaminated clothing and personal protective equipment, etc. And then when you read section 11 and 12, about toxic and ecological information, it just says data not available. So our councils are filling our parks with this stuff, and we think data not available is simply not good enough. So in America, there are lawsuits alleging that the companies failed to warn customers of the potentially dangerous toxins that the products contained. And who knows, maybe that might happen in Australia as well. But given the Australian climate, we are particularly concerned about toxic off-gassing in the summer heat. And we've had anecdotal stories of new fields smelling bad on hot days. And as some of us live about 5 meters away from the edge of the synthetic field at Gardner Park, this concerns us greatly and will not stop until there is a moratorium on synthetic fields. The community really wants reassurance that what is being dumped in our parks, in some cases right next to people's houses, is safe and not toxic. Now, next, Katrina's going to fill us in about how we've been connecting with other environmental groups that are concerned about synthetic fields. Thank you. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Greta, for all of that. The thought that this stuff is being rolled out by the hectare without any Australian standard underpinning, I think is deeply problematic. The thought that it's being rolled out in our neighbourhoods and our communities, and in the case of Gardner Park, you know, within not a stone's throw, but an even shorter distance from the back of your homes, and we don't yet know about the toxicity of it all, equally troubling. So look, we are lucky to have Kat Carver join us. Kat's a resident in Banksia and is a core member of the Save Gardner Park team. That's been a year-plus long campaign against synthetics in local parks. And in fact, that matter is now before the Land and Environment Court. Kat's efforts have connected with other, no pun intended, grassroots communities with up-to-date information on synthetics, and it's led to many councils through the connections Kat, Greta and others have made. Councils in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia pressing pause, many of them reversing decisions, stopping a process that was otherwise going to see a decision to put a synthetic grass field in. Kat says it's about smart parks, not plastic parks. Kat.
Okay. Thanks, David, again for hosting webinar 2.0 and to see all of the experts who have been so helpful in all of their advice. Yes, a year ago, it was just before the first lockdown when we found out that Gardner Park, which is the image behind me, and that image is actually being used on the billboard of a house for sale in our area right now. So that year ago, we looked around and thought, who else has also struggled with a council and how are these synthetics being built? So we looked around, you do your Google search, and we couldn't find that many other groups. First one we found was Mimosa in Turramurra, and it seemed like there were a few little strange clauses that allowed them to pull back on the synthetic with their council. So we thought, right, our council will listen to us if we put together a good case and talk about the biodiversity and talk about the heritage. We thought they would listen. You know, if we were passionate and we thought this is our first experience with council, this is what it's all about, listening to residents and residents' concerns, particularly where the park is alongside residents. It's actually 3 sides of resident houses. So it seemed very unsuitable and they were building other synthetics. So we put on a smile, wrote our speeches and presented to council, and it was silent. So we kept talking to other places and it was very hard to find other groups. And this is what was frustrating, is that we thought it can't just be us. So we did our best Facebook search and Twitter feeds, hashtags, whatever we could. And we knew that there were other places around. And after a year, we can say that there's about 12 of them in Sydney, from, as I said, Turramurra, St Ives, Lane Cove, Hunters Hill, Gladesville, Manly Vale. And what we found out was the exact same problem was in Greenwich, Bob Campbell Oval in Greenwich. And the fantastic people over there, Liz and Mary, I think you're listening in here, have also, you know, been presenting to council who also don't listen. So the council problem is interesting because we thought that council was there for residents to listen to their concerns. And it has been a very frustrating course of action. So we've had to go and leapfrog up to you, David, and of course to the higher ups. And we've turned into almost a lobby group, having to speak to the Department of Planning. And we've also had to spread that across because there's multiple issues. So we're speaking to the Department of Health, the Department of Education, where they're putting synthetic fields into schools and parklands. So many of these departments would like them to speak to each other and to see that in a community, now that we've got evidence of grass has possibilities, that heat is a problem, but we've always been solution focused. And by talking to Mick and Paul, we've found out that grass can be the smart solution, as we've said. So apart from all of those groups, we did a lot of Facebook searching and we connected with Victoria. And I know that John Englert down there in Victoria has been fantastic with his research. Again, these fantastic sort of resident scientific researchers are there. But then we were quite buoyed by the Mayor of Mitcham in South Australia, Mayor Heather Holmes Ross in Mitcham in South Australia at the recent Australian Local Government Conference. Motion 24 was asking all councils to investigate and pause on synthetic turf. Now, Mayor Heather is interesting as she's a retired research scientist. So just a simple bit of critical thinking, something that in education everybody wants people to have a bit of critical thinking. You have to think, why are we putting these synthetic fields in? And you should stop and think about it. So we're very pleased with the motion that was apparently accepted at the Australian Local Government Conference. Luckily, we had a moment where everyone could reach each other and think about this. So local councils are thinking about their environment. They are thinking about their synthetic turf. And the other thing we found out was that New South Wales Football doesn't have an environment policy. They don't have something that we could actually tack to them and say, this does not fit into your environment policy. There's no landfill, there's no circular economy. So we're actually asking many of these authoritative agencies to think about the environment and to remember that residents are watching and listening. So connecting everybody and also helping others with their councils. So, you know, we are now seen as the leading group, which we didn't really want to be. We've become this group because we believe that local parks should be grass and they should be safe environments for our families. Now, I'll just show you a couple of pictures. I'll just share the screen of what's happening at Gardner Park at the moment. Their bulldozers are in there. And if it comes up. So this is a, I'm not sure if that's sharing.
Not sharing yet, Kat.
Okay, pressing very slow buttons. So this is what our park looked like about a year ago, if it does play. This is our stone staircase. The park was built in the 1935 as a Depression era project. And you come up these stairs and you have this lovely big grass. So there wasn't anything really wrong with the grass. It had a few bits of ponding.
We're still not getting the share, Kat.
Still not there?
I think
There's a green button down the bottom, share screen.
Sorry, I'll make sure I press that. Okay, pressing that button now. And if it's not going to work, we'll just have to, I might just leave that share screen, but it is basically the image behind me. And right now, the park used to be a quarry. It then turned into a park and it looks like a quarry right now. So if anyone wants to have a bit of eco-side tourism, you can come down to Gardner Park Banksia and see what's happening there. But the court said that the park is reversible, and that will be a very interesting outcome for Bayside Council. Thanks.
Thanks, Kat. And again, thanks for the work you do and the work that all of your team have done. And can I say it is having a real impact. As I said, there's a draft report at the beginning. There's a draft report that's going to go to the Minister for Open Spaces, addressing all of these real concerns. And I know Gardner Park, and in fact, I think a number of the speakers we have here tonight were contributed to that process through making submissions and speaking with the department on synthetic grass. And in my local patch of the woods, I'm a recovering Woollahra Greens councillor. I served 2 terms on my local council. But 6 years ago, they made a decision, a unanimous decision, except for the one Greens councillor who spoke against it, to put a synthetic turf oval on one of their rugby fields. And just less than a fortnight ago, a motion was passed picking up the information that's been gathered from the experts we have here, from Gardner Park and others. A motion was adopted this time unanimously to say they would not install another synthetic field, and it was very, very clear that they are beginning to get the message, and they have got the message about the cost and the environmental damage that they do. So we have a bunch of questions in the Q&A, and I'd urge people to, whack them in the Q&A now. We'll get through as many as we can. Why don't we start with, I'll put two questions together, one from John and another from Cole, and they're talking about particular sporting codes. One is asking about hockey, and because the question is there now a standard that you have to have synthetic grass for hockey? And the other one is, how about soccer or football, round ball football, where there apparently there is a greater impetus towards synthetic grass in football than there is in the other sporting codes. Mick or Paul, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I'll kick that off. On the hockey front, they've moved to more water-based synthetic and have been there for quite a while. It's actually also a safety issue for those guys, because they're whacking the ball so hard that you don't want uneven surfaces and balls flying up unpredictably into faces at short range. So they're more water-based stuff. I haven't kept up with what they're doing in terms of their various generations, but I can't see hockey going back. That ship probably sailed about 10, 15 years ago for those guys. In terms of football, Mick's done quite a bit of work rebuilding fields in Sydney, the football fields. Middlehead is one. Gymea Bay is another one that handled like 60 hours a week. It's one of the most intensely used fields, and it was an absolute disaster before he got his mitts on it. Ewan Park's the football field. There's heaps of them. I've been involved in a few up here. Lake Macquarie, Leiden field is one. So football's the main driver for actually getting the soils fixed, getting the right turf in, because they are the ones with the biggest amount of wear damage, but also the growth in numbers.
Mick, did you want to add to that?
I think it's important to really point out that the soccer clubs, they're just sick of playing on rubbish. They've just been handed rubbish. So synthetic's only coming up because of the rubbish that's being handed to them. If we gave them decent fields, they wouldn't do this. And it's alarming. You look at, say, Middlehead, and obviously it's done well. But when I say that Middlehead's probably the 85 to 90 percentile in terms of wear levels across Sydney, you realise just how bad all that other rubbish is that's out there. And the moment we get outside of Sydney and towards Western Sydney and that kind of stuff, we shouldn't have bad fields at all. Football, rugby league actually causes less wear than soccer. So, and the clubs tend to be smaller anyway. So there's no excuse for converting a synthetic, a rugby league field to synthetic turf. And my young fellow who plays football says he wouldn't want to be tackled on that. I won't fill in the rest of it. But nonetheless, he didn't find it a decent surface to play on.
Yeah. Sebastian, thanks both for that. So very doable, particularly for soccer/round ball football, but hockey with those additional concerns about the speed of the gameplay and the balls. Probably we're talking different solutions, or a water-based synthetic grass solution. One of the questions we've had is about heat mitigation measures for artificial grass. This is probably to you, Sebastian. I suppose you could put a roof over it and put it all indoors. But apart from that, have you seen any heat mitigation measures for synthetic grass that would make it survivable on a hot Sydney summer's day?
So one of the newer developments that I mentioned in my talk at the end uses something like an absorbing layer at the base of the actual synthetic turf, where you need to irrigate your sports field. And then this particular material seems to work like what you would get from Bunnings as a soil wettener, or as an improvement for holding soil moisture in place. And that seems to, that's at least the claim from the producer of this material, that seems to then help to mimic what you get with natural turf, where you have evaporative cooling. I don't know if that really is true. I don't know what this material is made from, but at least the principle from the physics behind it, the principle can absolutely work to make the surface temperature lower because of evaporative cooling. How much that works, because we really find that also natural turf isn't really well connected to the atmosphere, because the boundary layer on your turf is very, very small, meaning that the hot air that you see above the turf surface itself isn't really mixing with the atmosphere much. It's rather disconnected. So it's not like trees that add a lot of mixing to the atmosphere, and you get your cooler air being mixed with the warmer air. That's why I don't know how this would pan out, where maybe the surface temperature goes down, but for example, your field-like temperature may be unaffected. But I have no data on that. It's just how I view the product.
None of that transpiration that actually provides that micro cooling from trees and from natural grass. You don't see that happening. But anyhow, the idea that you install a synthetic grass field, which you then have to water.
Yeah, one of the big benefits gone, right?
It's a kind of new level of weird in the decision making that would see us go down that path.
Plus, we don't know what that chemical or that substance is that you use to actually store the water, because there's another introduction of a compound that we don't know what that really does.
Yeah. We've had a question probably to Greta and Kat. What does your council mean by it's reversible? Is one question we've had, and the other question is, can you tell us about the sort of other groups? Any more information about the other groups across Sydney?
So maybe I'll answer that first question. When we took council to court, we asked for an injunction to stop them from, starting the build until the court had decided whether it's legal or not. And the judge said, the judge didn't grant an injunction, but said that the council could go ahead with this, what we call a downgrade, on the condition that everything they do is reversible. So council's gone ahead and they've, started installing the field, and that's why we keep saying it's all reversible, because that was the undertaking that they actually took and gave to the court. So yeah, we've actually got another day in court tomorrow, so we're very excited to see how that goes.
Yeah, indeed. And the other groups?
The other groups. So the other groups, and this is why we've made a very open Facebook page and the website and the Twitter feed and the Instagram, is we'd like people to be able to find information as quickly as, a lot quicker than we had to find it, and also collate the information, because there's vast amounts. So the other groups are, so it started off with, I actually got in touch with Callum Park, one of the most famous sort of park fights. Callum Park in Rozelle. I got in touch with Ros Burge there, who was fantastic. She said the bulldozers would be at the gate and we still saved the park, which for us was, we had the police at the gate and Greta and Maria were there to be arrested. So we knew that we had some fairly hairy moments to deal with. So Callum Park was the big park. After that, Mimosa in Turramurra, then Barrabury, St Ives, Bob Campbell in Greenwich. We also found out that North Sydney had been through it, but they had successfully inserted into their plan of management that there would be no synthetic park. And that was one of the interesting things, is that when the plans of management are written for parks, people don't know of synthetic fields back in 1995. So plans of management, and this is a key thing for residents should be updated to say this park is not suitable for synthetic, it's in a floodway or it's heritage, or some parks just make synthetic 2 or 3 times more expensive, which is what happened at Gardner by being in a floodway. They have to raise the field. So after St Ives, Greenwich, we knew it was happening in Manly Vale. It was also happened at Arlington in Dulwich Hill, where we heard that the off-gassing or the smell was very noticeable to all the residents. So each park and each campaign had a unique issue that they shared with us, and that's where we've built everything up. Greenwich has its extraordinary biodiversity, which goes into Sydney Harbour. Lane Cove, Blackman Park, they've changed the water course, which means it has destroyed the mangroves, which is on the Lane Cove River. And mangroves are very important for carbon. They're a blue carbon, more so than other trees and grass.
Amongst other things for mangroves, fish breeding and the like. Kat, it sounds to me like you're getting a network there, sharing information, and that's one of the critical things in your campaign.
Correct. And after the networking, each one of us has approached from politicians to experts. So we hope that we are at that critical mass. We are at that tipping point where other councils like Wallara, and the most recent one was even our council, who wanted to put a pause on synthetics.
Cool.
We think it's
I'll have to run to the next question, Kat, because we've only got a short period and we've got a bunch of questions there. But there's more of that detail on Save Gardner Park Facebook page, and you can follow that work on social media as well. We will be uploading this video both on Facebook, but we've had a request for YouTube, and we'll make sure we do that as well. There's been a series of questions about the heat. I wasn't sure whether it was Sebastian or Mick or who mentioned the 30-degree ceiling that's there in synthetic grass. Does that come, the idea that you shouldn't play on a day that's hotter than 30 degrees Celsius for synthetics? Is that part of the, is that an Australian standard? Is it part of the manufacturer's specifications? Where does that come from?
That's on the New South Wales Football's. They've got a synthetic fields guideline, and it's actually in the synthetic fields guideline that they've published. But Sebastian will be able to know. He had one of those thermometers where you measured the equivalent field temperature. So what's the ground temperature at which you'd feel, so 35 or 40 degrees or whatever, that's really what it's going. But they were saying 30 degrees is the cutoff.
Was that the ground temperature or the ambient temperature?
The ambient temperature.
Yeah. What sort of temperature is that going to produce on the pitch, Sebastian?
It depends on your environmental conditions. If you have clear sky for several hours before you go onto the pitch, midday or early afternoon, you could still find surface temperatures somewhere between 60 and 80 degrees. It's just a material, and it doesn't matter. When you get the intense sun in Australia, in summer, we do get, as I said, up to 1,000, sometimes 1,200 watts per square meter. That's a lot of energy. And that's just then captured by the material and re-radiated. You are the one that's in the way of that kind of heat emission coming off the material. Can I, David, just quickly, because it was mentioned, I think Greta mentioned that a member has reached out to Australian standards. I was contacted just a few days ago because of that, because I'm working with Australian standards. I have worked on other Australian standards, and I am currently working on developing Australia's first handbook for urban green infrastructure. So I am aware of what Standards Australia is actually for and what they're doing. And I basically told the person that called me that this is not a matter for Standards Australia, because the only thing you can do to cool it down is to shade the turf. The material itself has been or is allowed to be sold in Australia. So it has gone through safety testing, and this safety testing in the industry does not include surface burns or anything like that. This is just not part of the legislated requirements to get this product into market. And so I don't think Australian standards is the right place to try and find if they can develop a standard, because the standard will not say, if you install this stuff, you need to shade it. That's just not what they're there for. So it was just interesting to close the loop on that kind of discussion. I thought I'll throw that in here.
Thank you. That is really fascinating, actually. And I know Garnet will be very interested to hear that. So I think that's, I guess, the next question is, how do we improve safety testing? How do we include heat issues in safety testing?
Good question. I guess we need a few more people burning themselves until people wake up and really see that heat issue is a problem on many different surfaces, and it goes all the way. If you want to really string this out, it goes all the way to taking your dog for a walk on a hot day on bitumen, where you basically cook your dog on that bitumen. The bitumen gets up to 80 degrees. The dog thermal mass is very close to the surface and therefore extremely exposed to radiant heat. So you see, where do you start?
Sebastian, we're going to stop you there because it's a deeply disturbing image,
Yes.
but it's one that we should have in our mind.
It's the reality.
And yeah, indeed. And we don't want this resolved by litigation after that kind of damage is done to animals and to players and to young kids playing on it. We want to actually get ahead of this and have good regulation. And I think that's our goal. That's my goal, I can tell you, as a Greens MP, to get ahead of that. So we don't wait for a bunch of litigation and duty of care cases to actually reverse this. Paul and Mick, there's been a number of questions about two things, about costs. Is there a good source that we can go to, a nice little summary that says, here's the cost of a synthetic field versus here's the cost of a top class turf field, that summarises it neatly, that even people like me can digest?
There's a paper I presented at Ozwater 20 last year online. I think I flicked it through to your office before, David. I'm more than happy to have that circulated. So that's got a summary of the life cycle costs, but also addressing some of the myths around turf. It's got the carrying capacity data that I presented, so it's all there. There is a big document that Mick and I have been working on for about 12 months now that's coming. I can't say what it is yet, but it's going to have a whole stack of seminal information on turf, how to do best practice and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So watch this space. As soon as it can be released and shared, we'll share it.
Yeah. And Mick, how much of this is actually teaching the authorities that are responsible for green open space just the basics? You know, how much of it is it an education role with councils, with other public land managers, maybe even with schools?
It's very frustrating. And then you get some councils that you deal with where you tell them how to do things right and they follow your instructions. And then you get the next council and they'll pay you to come and assess and give them a report. And then the contractor will just come out who's building the field and just tell them that it's better off swapping this turf to this turf and don't worry about amending the soil, it doesn't matter. They don't realise they've just compromised the carrying capacity by more than 50%. Then it gets worn out again. And I've got sites where they've just utterly destroyed the field. The soccer club has, it's not their fault because the field was built with the wrong turf cultivar and 6 months later it was a disaster. First thing they did was ask for a synthetic field.
Now at the last one of these forums, we had some detailed evidence presented about the microplastics and the runoff and some of the research that was being done in that regard. We've had a number of questions about that. We didn't have an expert covering that in this seminar because we dealt with it in the last seminar. But does anybody want to just give us a very short 30-second potted summary of where that research is up to?
I can say from my own reading that I haven't seen any independent studies that actually that are published through peer review process. This is the standard that I'm looking for, that are actually looking at where does the microplastic go. And it's not just the rubber crumb I'm concerned about, but it's also the actual plastic that breaks off due to UV brittleness of the actual blades of the grass itself. I haven't seen any serious study that has looked into waterways, aquatic life, looking at stormwater runoff, just trapping what actually comes off those fields and quantifying it. I was in one of those expert workshops for the study that is undertaken at the moment by Minister Stokes. And even there, nobody could tell me about results or studies that were seriously looking at these impacts. So still to come.
Yeah.
That's my word on this one.
I know there's field research at the moment by the Australian Microplastic Assessment Project, and that's particularly with Northern Beaches Council, and they were looking, I think some of that's actually been funded by the New South Wales Environmental Protection Authority. And from memory, they found tens and tens of thousands of instances of microplastics within a very short distance of synthetic fields. And none of that pollution was found near natural fields. So I think that study is in the field at the moment, but the initial results are deeply, deeply troubling in terms of the amount of microplastics. Could I thank you all for your, again, for your attendance tonight and the work you're all doing in your day jobs. Day jobs become night jobs. Night jobs become the next day jobs because we're on lockdown. But I really do appreciate it. Can I just ask for maybe just a little 20-second summary from each of you about where to next or summaries from today? And we might just go in reverse order to which we contributed. So, Kat.
We hope that councillors will take their time, use their critical thinking skills, and also look at the idea that you don't go from a bad field to synthetic, that there are other options, and we've always been solution based, and we are actually sports positive. We want these fields to be open and free for turn-up play as well as organised sports. And the solution, we always say, is smart grass.
Thanks, Kat. Greta?
Yeah, I guess we'll continue this, and especially I think looking at how to improve safety testing for things that are being rolled out across New South Wales. Things like the synthetic turf, it really needs to be thought about in more detail. And I guess that's what we're doing, educating councillors, educating people around New South Wales, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Greta. Paul?
Yep, I think the big thing is just I get frustrated with 1 hour solutions and not systems thinking. So let's look at the whole system, let's look what's causing the problems and actually address the problems rather than just diving in for the first and most obvious thing. We've got clubs who want to play, we've got residents who want to use their fields. Well, let's fix the fields, but let's also have a look at the rating systems and how much money councils are getting, so you don't have hunger games within councils to fix their libraries, to fix their roads, to fix their sporting fields. There's big system problems that we've got here that need to be looked at.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. The first answer you get when you talk to a local council is we don't have any money. It's about time that level of government was actually respected and properly funded. Mick?
Yeah, basically, I see all the time, you step back in time from a bad field and you go back about 3 or 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and it was a bad field then. And the soccer club have got frustrated, or the rugby league clubs got frustrated over time. And then eventually they've turned to synthetic. And now the environmentalists are arguing, so to speak, points of view with the soccer club. Go back in time. If you see a field that's bad and it's not performing, go and help your soccer club fix their field. They won't ask for synthetic if they've got a nice field to start with. Shut the gate before the horse bolts.
Yeah. Sebastian?
Look, I'm working on cooling cities. I keep saying publicly climate change is happening now, and every measure that we can throw against increasing heat in cities, we should actually consider and put in place. Synthetic turf is adding heat. I don't see a place for it in cities where you have people trying to enjoy a park. I see other places where synthetic turf may have its use, but not in the city where we need more cooling.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mick, Sebastian, Paul, Kat and Greta. I've come away knowing a great deal more about synthetic grass than I did coming into this particular session. I think it doesn't matter what level you look at it, whether it's on a level of climate, and as Sebastian says, the climate's getting hotter. We need good system-wide solutions to that. First of all, dealing with the atmospheric pollution, but beyond that, also making sure our cities are survivable and as positive as they can be with increasing temperatures. It doesn't make sense in social. We often have people excluded from synthetic grass. And as Paul and Mick have pointed out very clearly, it doesn't make sense even financially to be going down this path, which is often the one sell that these synthetic turf merchants are throwing at council. So we will be uploading this on Facebook, also on YouTube. Please do. We'll put some links in there to the different published papers. Please do get in contact and follow the work of Friends of Gardner Park and your other local community campaigns that are fighting to keep their green open space green and natural rather than industrial and plastic. And again, we're doing this in lockdown. There could be no more important time to think about how important our green open spaces are, and we keep them as green and natural. Thanks again, everybody. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, David. Bye, everyone.
See you all.
Bye.